Hey, everybody, I'm Pastor Alec,
I'm Eli.
and we are back talking about First Kings, and we're just reading on through. So, last time we started this thing off, talking about the first chapter and kind of some introductory things.
Right.
So, what you got now as we're moving through the beginning here?
The first thing that I was wanting to ask was the last words of King David.
Yeah, yeah, those are interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe even, I don't know, maybe unexpected, but also if you really think about what David is kind of like throughout the narrative, maybe expected. I mean, he's talking to Solomon, and basically he goes through this list of like, all right, these are the people that are political enemies of mine that I couldn't kill.
Right.
So now I want you to do it for me. And it's again, you might think it's kind of bizarre, um, but no, this was this is really, if you think about it, this was a lot of David's life. Is he's a very political figure in
Right.
Israel, and he is
He's always fighting.
he's always
Yeah.
fighting. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good way to put
Yeah.
it. He's always fighting, and he also, it's not just that. He also says, this is how it begins. He says, I'm about to go the way of all the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses. So David knows of the law of Moses.
Right.
Some scholars have speculated whether or not David ever really had the law of Moses, or if it got lost after 400 years or something.
Right.
But
Yeah.
here you see he's got the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn, that the Lord may establish his word that he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons pay close attention to their way, to walk before me in faithfulness with all their heart and with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. So this is David's charge, is be faithful to God, and our family, our dynasty, will continue to rule over
Right.
Israel. And David, it is a known thing that the dynasty of David, which it lasts about 500 years, okay, in regards to earthly reign, of course, Jesus is also a descendant of David, and he
Right.
reigns forever. But his earthly reign is about 500 years,
Okay.
and it's a known thing that this is, I believe, the longest standing dynasty in world history.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, Israel wasn't always a big
Right.
country, but it is, I believe, the longest standing dynasty in world history. I could be wrong about that, but if it's not, it's close.
Right. How many generations was it?
Oh gosh, well, it's hard to, I don't know that number off the top of my head, and I would say, well, you could just go count, in the genealogies, but the genealogies are kind of different. They'll skip generations and all
Right.
that. I don't know that off the top of my head, how many generations, but um, but as far as single family, from father to son, father to son, father to
Right.
son, it is the longest standing
Okay. Yeah.
dynasty. Yeah, about 500 years. So, okay, well then David dies. So this is First Kings. First Samuel, we're introduced to David. Second Samuel, that's David reigning from the
Right.
beginning to the end, and then First Kings, now he dies, and something new is happening now with Solomon.
Right.
So,
So starting with chapter 3, in verse 2, meanwhile, the people sacrificed at the high places because there was no house built for the name of the Lord until
Yeah.
those days. So would the high places be like kind of like how we would view a church almost?
Yes and no. You to think that where is the place where Israel is supposed to offer sacrifices?
Oh,
You know
Bethel?
this. Okay, but all right, that's even more specific. Well, you think of like maybe in Shiloh or something.
Yeah.
But David brings it to Jerusalem. And what
Okay,
does he
yeah.
bring to Jerusalem? He brings the ark. He brings the
Yeah.
tabernacle.
Okay.
He brings, so they're supposed to go to the tabernacle.
Okay.
Whatever city it happens to be in, because it
Right.
moves around a little bit. But at this point, it's in Jerusalem, and it will remain in Jerusalem until the temple's destroyed by the
Right.
Babylonians, and the temple's not there yet, but the altar is there, and they're going to make a new altar, but the altar is there.
Right.
There's an altar, and that is the designated place where the Israelites are to offer their sacrifices.
Okay.
Okay, so now what are the high places? Well, what if you're living way up north? Right, you're way far away. What if you're across the Jordan River? Remember, 2.5 tribes settled across
Right.
the Jordan River. Are you coming back every single time to offer sacrifices?
Right.
Probably not. And so what's happened and what seems to have been going on for a long time is that you get the people of Israel. They kind of mixed in with the people around them and adopted some of their practices. And a lot of people probably are not making the pilgrimage each time to offer a sacrifice into Jerusalem at this point. And so they are modifying some of their practices to look a little bit like the people around them, and they are building up high places to sacrifice.
Okay.
You see it's not the only place that this is done. You see Saul do this. Okay? So this is something that became part of Israelite culture, offering to the high places.
Yeah.
It's not by God's design, but it is something that becomes a deeply ingrained part of their culture.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So it also shows that the people are kind of doing whatever they kind of think is right.
Right.
Which you still, that's something that is characteristic of the book of Judges for 400 years. Nowhere does the text say, and that stopped happening.
Right.
People are still doing this. I mean, this is what they're doing. There is no, David's got the book of Moses, the law of Moses.
Yeah.
But people, you might have places where it's being read, but not like it would be read later on
Okay.
in their history.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, they're doing what they think is right. They're offering their sacrifices to the high places, and the high places, it's the text. Then it says that the people were sacrificing at the high places. However, because no house had yet been built for the name of the Lord,
Right.
so it kind of puts the temple forward as that's going to be the place that's going to solve all the problems.
Right.
But it doesn't. The tabernacle didn't solve those problems. The temple's not going to solve those problems because for the rest of 1st and 2nd Kings, they're going to be offering to the high places. And then especially later on in 2nd Kings, a king is going to be judged almost by how they dealt with the high places.
Okay.
And it's going to say that.
So it's kind of like foreshadowing. Almost.
Yeah, that's right. It's definitely it's making this plug, kind of putting it there, putting it in your mind,
Right.
saying, watch out for this. This is going to be a thing. And it is.
Also, the temple that they talk about, was
Mm-hmm.
that the same one that it was King Herod that rebuilt it, right?
Yeah, so King Herod is doing this stuff, 20, 30 years before the birth of Jesus.
Right.
Okay, so so it is and it isn't. The temple that's going to be built it's going to be built by Solomon, middle of the 10th century BC.
Okay.
Herod the Great is not going to come around to the end of the 1st century BC.
Right.
So you're talking these guys are 900 years apart.
Yeah.
So Solomon's going to build the first one. That one is going to be destroyed. That's going to stand for about 400 years, 450 years, something like that. That's going to stand until 586 BC when the Babylonians destroy it. And then in 517 BC, the Israelites are sent back by the Persians. Babylon's conquered by Persia. They're sent back by the Persians to rebuild their temple.
Okay.
And they're going to rebuild the temple.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, it is as early as even like 535. Some are sent back. I mean, some are they're sent back in waves, several waves, but they're gonna rebuild the temple. That's going to be called the Second Temple, or we refer to it as the Second Temple.
Right.
And then that is the temple that Herod is going to modify and strengthen.
Okay.
And he's going to build a huge complex around it.
Right.
To the point that you can't even see to this day, some of Herod's walls still exist. And you can hardly even see the mountain that it's built on.
Yeah.
Because this complex that he used to fortify this temple, it engulfs the entire mountain, although it's not really, it's a hill. It's
Yeah.
not that big of a.
Right.
It's not a. We call it the Temple Mount, but it's a hill. But yeah, that's the same temple,
Okay.
the Jerusalem temple.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. And then he says here, I guess you kind of answered this question.
Okay.
Because it said Solomon loved the Lord and walking in the statutes of his father, except that he sacrificed and burnt incense at the high places.
Yeah, that's right.
So David didn't do that?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that you see David doing that. Does he? I mean, he does other things. He eats the bread of presence, which Jesus then refers to. And, I'm not sure if you see him doing that. I don't recall.
Okay.
But yeah, even Solomon, the one who builds the temple, is going to
Right.
offer in the high. I mean, it's just what they did.
Right.
It's just what they did. And you have to think he used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar.
Yeah.
That's all. I mean, he is just. That's,
It's
you know,
like 3 a day.
yeah,
Yeah.
That's for a year, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
My next question. So it said Solomon had 12 governors over all of Israel. Was
Okay.
that almost like, yeah, he was king. I'm sure he had absolute authority.
Yeah, by this time, yeah, he's got absolute authority because remember that King Saul was not really king over all of Israel.
Was he just the south, or was he
Well,
just a certain part?
He was a regional king over the tribe of Benjamin.
Okay.
Okay, so he's a regional king, and he's technically king over all of Israel
Right.
because the judge of all of Israel anointed him as king, Samuel.
Yeah.
But even the judges were kind of regional judges.
Yeah.
So this goes back to the whole book of Judges right before 1 Samuel, where Saul's anointed, where the people of Israel are kind of doing what's best in their own eyes.
Right.
And there's civil war even before that. I mean, it's a mess.
Yeah.
The book of Judges ends in civil war. And so he is kind of called the king of all of Israel, but he's not really the king of all of Israel. There's still clearly from the text, there's a very strong tribal identity in Judah,
Yeah.
which you see throughout. I mean, eventually that is how the kingdom is going to be split between Judah and the rest of Israel.
Right.
Okay. So there is this very strong tribal identity of Judah. It's not unlike, here I'll give a comparison. It's like the Roman Empire, the late Roman Empire, or even the early Roman Empire, which was established by Caesar Augustus. There's several different dates you could give to that. Maybe, one of them be like, 20 BC.
Right.
Okay. And over the course of time, the Roman Empire, and before that it was a republic for 400 or 500 years.
Right.
But the empire was expanding. The republic was expanding too, but the empire really was expanding. And even as the empire expanded all around the Mediterranean, even north into Europe, even to the British Isles, there was still a distinction between those living in the west of the empire and those living in the east.
Yeah. Okay.
So
yeah.
those in the west were speaking Latin, and those in the east were speaking Greek.
Right. Well, didn't they split?
Exactly, right? So eventually what happens is that there's schism. The 2nd century was the golden age of the Roman Empire. The 3rd century was an absolute mess, like 70 emperors and like 50 of them died of unnatural causes. It was an absolute mess. The 4th century it began. This is kind of odd. Almost with a strong emperor who persecuted Christianity. Diocletian, right before Constantine, Diocletian, and he had structured the empire so that there would be a west and an east, and there were actually quadrants. Okay. And but there was always kind of maintain the distinction between the east and the west, and again because there was always that cultural distinction, and so when the empire eventually did crumble, the two cultures remained.
Right.
That you had the cultural distinction. And this is exactly what's happening with Israel.
Okay.
Is you always had a distinct tribal identity in Judah that
Right.
was different. Okay, and this is where David comes from. And so after Saul dies, his son Ishbosheth is king. And might have talked about this last time. I think we did. Ishbosheth is king for a little while over Israel, and David is king over Judah.
Okay, yeah.
And then Ishbosheth is taken out, kind of assassinated by raiders, which is kind of a weird thing.
Right.
And then David becomes king over all of Israel and unites it all.
Okay.
This is what we call the united monarchy. It's united over everything. And so by the end of David's reign, he really is probably reigning over united Israel.
Right.
So this kingdom then that Solomon inherits, I would say it's a united kingdom. Okay. So yes, he's got now in place a way to govern everything.
Right.
Right? So he's got the infrastructure, the political infrastructure in place to govern everything.
Right.
And Solomon is king of Israel.
Okay, yeah.
Right?